Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at KO-online.com. Hello and welcome to the newest edition of Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette. Today we have a very special guest, someone I first met about probably 15, 16 years ago when I was judging professional MMA fights. And I've told this to many people in all my years of martial arts, probably one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. So welcome to the show, Mr. Nice Guy, Brock Larson.
Thank you. Don't tell everybody that. I don't want them all to think I'm a nice guy. I got a reputation to uphold.
Yeah, but I'm serious. I've said that so many times to so many people. And I've met a lot of guys too who are jerks in the pro MMA world, and you've always just been super nice to everyone I've seen you around, everyone you interact around, just your personality, and that says a lot about you, which is cool.
Yeah, it's always kind of been. I've always been fairly humble. Grew up on a farm, and my parents always told me, if it doesn't hurt you, if it doesn't cost you money, it doesn't hurt someone else, be nice, helping people out. So that's kind of something that, growing up on a farm was kind of a pain in the butt because you always had to work. But at the end of the day, I think it kind of helped mold kind of more of who I am and more of a personal being, because I know sometimes life isn't easy and not everything's given to you. So
right.
I know life can be hard for some people. So sometimes by just being happy and saying hi and being a smiley face might help someone out,
There you go. That's a great attitude to have. So let's kind of back up then. You talked about growing up on a farm. You grew up near Brainerd, Minnesota.
Yep, out east of Brainerd. My mom and dad owned about 300 acres, had about 80 head. They're still farming today, and I still get out there and get shit on my boots every once in a while and help them out.
That says a lot about your work ethic too, in the gym too. I suppose that a lot of that translates to it.
Yeah, I think a lot of that did. It's obviously growing up on a farm. You have to get up early and you have to take care of the cows. They don't take care of themselves, and you gotta get out there and bale the hay to feed the cows and do all that stuff that when you're a kid, you're thinking why can't I just be a town kid? I get on my bike and go bike around with my friends, but instead I got to get up and feed the cows and yeah. But at the end of the day, I think it did. Showed good work ethic. Nothing's going to get done unless you do it. And it's still going to be there if you procrastinate. So you might as well just get up and do it so it's done so you can get on with your day. And I've taken a lot of that approach with my training, with my career, and with my teaching, with everything. Just kind of let's just do it. And, and I enjoy it. So it makes everything a lot easier.
Nice. Now you started wrestling at a young age. Was wrestling your first experience with martial arts in any way?
Yeah, I started by watching AWA, and I thought I wanted to be Superfly Jimmy Snuka or the Midnight Rockers or some of those Hawk and Animal, kind of those old school Greg Gagne guys. And I went into wrestling thinking we were body slamming and stuff, and then they started grabbing the legs and like hugging and squeezing. I'm like, well, this is weird, but I'm here, so let's see what it turns into. And then ended up obviously falling in love with wrestling and still love wrestling to this day. I ended up, after I graduated high school, coaching wrestling for like 5 years, and then moved on to martial arts after that.
And how did you find martial arts? Does that just happen by chance, or do you have a friend that recommended it?
It's a kind of a weird story. I was a wrestling coach, like I said, and one of my buddies from high school is like, I want to fight. I'm like, oh yeah, we all fight. He's like, no, I want to do like that UFC stuff like the Gracies do. I'm like, what? And he's like, but I don't know how to grapple. And at that time, jiu-jitsu, wrestling seemed to be pretty much the same thing. You just grab people and you try to bend things. So we started at the Franklin Junior High wrestling room, and I got in there and we started grappling with chokes and trying to hurt each other. Like everything that's illegal in wrestling. Let's go ahead and let's try that. So that's kind of how I started. And the fact that he was going to be the fighter, I was going to be the coach. But somewhere along the lines, he ended up, ended up with anxiety issues. And when he would go compete, he'd vomit and he just gets super, super sick and just couldn't handle the pressure of competing. And at that time we're still training. And then we kind of picked a fight, tried picking a fight. We thought we were really tough with Minnesota Martial Arts Academy. So we called them guys up and we're like, hey, we want to come down and spar. And they're like, well, don't come down and spar. We'll have a tournament. Our first tournament that we're ever going to do, the first grappling tournament in Minnesota, is going to be in 2 weeks. You guys just come down and do that. We're like, oh, perfect. So I got down to the very first submission hunt. And that's when I realized jiu-jitsu wasn't a bunch of tough guys in a wrestling room trying to squeeze each other's heads. I ended up winning the white belt division, but I realized there was a lot more to it than that. And I'm watching these blue belts, which back then in the 90s, early 2000s, blue belts were gods. Yeah. They're like black belts now, it seems like, and watching these guys move, and it's like, wow. So then we're like, well, we're going to train these guys. I've seen this guy, Sean Shirk, did a no-gi match, and I'm watching him. I'm like, whoa, that guy's super tough. Well, we should train with these guys. So then we ended up coming down to the academy 3 days a week and just training with those guys. And I was getting the snot kicked out of me every day. And every day I left there, I had to check my ego and be like, I wanted to quit. Like, this is stupid. Just like everybody goes through. And I was kind of spoiled at first because I was with a bunch of other people that didn't know anything. And I was the best grappler. But then when I got reality checked, it was hard for the ego. I was a big, strong wrestler, a state runner-up, multi-all-state guy, and always like one of the best athletes in the room. And then I'm getting beat by these long-legged, weak, frail looking people. And I'm like, it doesn't make any sense in my head. Right. Bigger, stronger, faster, right? No. So that's kind of how it got started. And like I said, my buddy realized that he can't compete. And Shirk and some of the guys at the academy, including my buddy in Brainerd, was like, you got to fight. I'm like, no way. You guys see what Sean's doing to me every day? Because I was like one of Sean's main training partners at that point, because I was just, he enjoyed beating the crap out of a big, strong kid. And so that's kind of how it started. And then they're like, no, you should take a fight. I'm like, dude, there's no way I'm getting killed. They're like, not everybody's like Sean. I'm like, I don't care. It's not even close. If they're kind of like Sean, I'm going to die. But they talked me into it. Just take one fight. Well, just take one fight. So I ended up going for Bruce Nelson. Was my first fight. Was supposed to be with Bruce Nelson. Okay. In Ada, Minnesota. And we drove all the way down there. And I was supposed to fight Josh Hartwell from Alexandria, who was a state runner-up. So it was a fair matchup. I was a state runner-up. He was a state runner-up. Ended up not happening. Got down there. Josh didn't show up for whatever reason it was. Okay. And at that time they said, do you want to do a round robin? We've got this kid from Canada. And then we've also got this other kid, Kyle Olson. And I'm like, whoa. And I seen at that time, Kyle Olson was 3-0. And I looked at him, I'm like, there's no way we're in the same weight class. They're like, well, we don't really do weight classes. I'm like, he says, as long as you're close. And I'm like, no. My buddy's like, no, let's not do it. We're not ready for like a round robin kind of fight where you'd fight 2 times in one night. I'm like, okay. And I was pooping my pants anyways. So I'm like, yeah, no, I'll find a different time. Well, the guy I was nervous about ended up getting crushed by this dude from Canada. Then the gears started to turn. It's like, holy crap. Okay. This is real. I mean, I got this guy from Winnipeg that just came down and smashed Kyle Olson, who looks like a freak, right? Mm-hmm. And so anyways, didn't fight. Ended up having fights in Alexandria, put on by, his name's escaping me now, Iron Man, Travis Fulton. Oh, yeah. Travis Fulton in Alexandria. And he called me up and said, hey, got your number from Bruce Nelson. You might want to fight. I'm like, yeah, sure. But if you're in Alexandria, I want to fight Josh Hartwell. He's from Alex. Makes sense. Yep. And they're like, done deal. That's what I was thinking. Like, okay. Showed up at Alexandria, had 5-6 people there. And there, me and Josh, and I was really nervous. I mean, I always depended on my takedowns. It kind of take, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to take this guy down probably. He's a state runner-up. We're both going to kind of, so I went in there with that attitude, like, I'm just going to try to knock him out. Mind you, I did not even know how to use my hands. And I actually came out, hit him with a jab, dropped him, spun and took his back, hit him a couple times. He tapped out. I'm like, this fighting stuff's way easier than wrestling. And so then I fell in love with it, and then it's fighting ever since.
So now, was that first one considered, did they have amateur fights back then?
Yeah, there's no amateur circuit. Everything was pro. So my first fight was a pro fight against, and Josh had a better record than me. He was like 3-0 at that time. Mm-hmm. And, but it didn't really, records were so weird and skewed. Nobody knew how to do anything back
Right.
then. There was the few freaks that Shirk, who was fighting in the UFC around that time already. And early UFC numbers. And,
Or like a Travis Fulton.
yeah. So but it's a lot of the wrestlers were pretty dominant. And so if you were a good wrestler, jiu-jitsu isn't like it is now, where you could take people down and beat them up. People didn't know really what to do. I mean, now jiu-jitsu is like, people are good with jiu-jitsu, so you got to respect the jiu-jitsu so people can easily stand up, because you can't just force and hold them down, because you end up getting in trouble. So the game was a lot different then. Wrestlers were just kind of dominating the sport for quite a while. So both of us being wrestlers, and then me really getting a lucky jab off that just kind of stunned him and dropped him. I was like, huh. So then, so it was great.
So after that, did you decide time to start working with my hands a little more? Did you actually start focusing?
Yeah. Well, I'm like, wow. I mean, a little bit of false advertisement. I'm like, wow, if I work my hands, I could just really start just knocking people out, and it's so much easier to take people down if you can knock them out. And so then I actually went and started training at the academy, more to focus on the hands too. And my first sparring group was horrible. I'm training with Nat McIntyre, who's little, tiny little fella, but literally felt like he was hovering and kicking you with both legs and both hands at the same time. And I was like, ah. And then Shirk was one of my sparring, but then I had Big Ed, he was a Thai fighter, and Tom Schmitz, who was, all these guys knew how to fight.
Right.
And I was barely starting to figure out the grappling part of it. And then I'm entering this another chapter of the hands. So then about halfway through, probably about a year into working with my hands, we decided to switch me to southpaw. Every time I'd shoot to take people in, I'd switch my stance and shoot. So Greg and some of the guys at the academy was like, why don't you just try being southpaw? You suck at hands anyway, so it doesn't matter. We just need we just need you to set up your takedowns with your punches. And every time you go to take someone down, you're switching your stance, which is a tell. Everybody's going to be able to tell you're going to shoot in. So then we developed a lot of entries off my takedown, and I became a southpaw. And then lo and behold, it was easier to knock people out, because just throwing the left hand out there accidentally hits people and they fall down. So it works out well.
Nice. And when you first started your career, you had a pretty good strength. You started 15-0. That's, even back then, that's still pretty impressive. Like you said, the first few people, the 3-0, some of those didn't matter. But when you get to 15-0, that's,
they started hunting me. They started hunting me down, and I was getting people from out of state and out of region coming up to fight me to kind of make that O disappear. And everybody's goal was to get into UFC.
Right.
And back then you needed more than just a record. You needed to beat somebody, and you need to beat someone with a good record, because there was tomato cans everywhere. Literally when I was fighting, they were pulling people out of the crowd to fight. So it's like, anybody here want to fight? We had someone, and then literally some drunk guy would come out of the crowd. I never fought one of those guys, but I wish I would have. That would have been fun. But no, but it was a true thing. Back in the Brad Kohler days, he was throwing anybody in there that had a pulse.
Well, there were some early events that I remember being at where there was better fights in the stands than there was in the cage.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
I remember Sean fighting some of these guys, and it's like, this poor guy. Sean was nice. I remember him fighting. He's like, you know what? I'm not even going to hit this guy. I'm just going to take him down and submit him. And literally shot in, took the guy down, and head and armed him. Like, what a sweetheart. He could have done anything he wanted.
Yeah.
And he was like, I can't do this to this guy. And he just take him down and head and arm him. But that was, some people would use that to showcase their skills too. So they'd try to do that highlight head kick and all that kind of stuff. But it was definitely kind of the cowboy days. Cowboys back to Wild West. So yeah, although it was fun, the way we got it now is much better, much safer. Yes. And it's just, everything's regulated, and it's a lot better sport because of competition. And
agreed.
You get an amateur circuit now where people are actually learning, and they're not necessarily getting fed to a Sean Shirk, just to fill the stands, As a promoter, it's a little bit more difficult. I promoted both, and it's easier just to call some guy and be like, hey, Johnny, I need you to fight Jimmy. I'll pay you a couple $100. Okay. Yeah. So promoter wise, it's a little more difficult because they got to go through the right steps, which again, it's safer. You got to get their blood work. They got to get their Hep B, C, HIV checked. They got to go through a physical and all that stuff. So it's a little bit harder to become a fighter, but at the end of the day, if you want to be a fighter, it's not that big of a deal.
Safer, and you're going to last longer. And
right.
So those first 3 years then, when you first, I think you went pro in 2002, and you made your UFC debut in 2005. Those first so many fights, is there one or two that stood out that you think made the UFC take notice?
Obviously I fought John Fitch my first fight, and it was a decision, and I lost. It was a close fight though. It was very boring. Typical John Fitch and Brock. We both were grapplers, so it was just not much action. It was boring. So I fought, and they cut me after my first fight. And then John went on to dominate the division, went 8 in a row in the UFC. So they took notice at him at some point, and which made them take notice at me. And I was still running through people in the local circuit. And so they're like, well, let's get him back here. Took a fight. I was 200 pounds, had to lose 30 pounds. Cause at that point I fought John Fitch at 185. And after that, both of us went down to 70. I mean, looking at Rich Franklin and looking at those guys, it's like, okay, I am not an 85 pounder. I remember my manager, after I fought John Fitch, brings Rich into my room. He's like, this is an 85 pounder. Fair enough. So I had went down to 70 at that point, and then John was tearing it up. And so short notice, like, we need a fight. We're going to fight a Miramar, which is a Marine base, no fans allowed, and we need someone to fight on this card, and we're going to have you fight Keita Nakamura. I'm like, okay. I'm like, Monty, I'm 200 pounds. Right now I'm doing concrete work and working another construction job. I'm working like 70 hours a week. He's like, you make weight, you win this fight. I'm like, okay. Cause mind you, there was some video, but not like it is now. Now so trying to find Nakamura, who had fought over in Japan, is almost impossible. Plus downloading it on my high speed internet that I had, dial up, it'd take 7 days. So I didn't have no clue who he was. Just taking my manager's word for it. Literally made the weight, lost 30 pounds in like 2.5 weeks, got in there, gassed about 3 minutes in of the first round. But I was just better. So it worked out. I got the win. So then they signed me. Well, I was already signed, but then they said, and they actually, at that point, they're like, okay, look, we've just bought this new organization, WEC, take your contract and put it over there. We need guys who are going to be exciting and that can fight on short notice to take fights. Will you go over and fight with this organization? I was like, what? And my manager's like, no, I think this is a great career move. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. So did it, went over there, and it was great because it was live on TV, free, and kind of exposed fighting. And I was all over the place. It was great because they replayed it 3-4 times a week. Yep. And
it built up a following fast.
It did. There's still people today I run into like, oh, WC, I love the WC guys, yep. And so the WC was great for me. And then I ran through the guys until I hit Condit, and then I freaking got armbarred, and then ran through the division again. And then when they dissolved the welterweight division, then they put us both. Condon and I were the only two welterweights that they put over in the UFC, and then I started back in the UFC. So I went UFC, WC, back to UFC, and then I started to get old, and then slow down. So that's kind of how that. And then it all folded. And then the way it went down ended up, in my opinion, maybe not perfect. It would have been loved to have been a world champion and fought in the UFC my entire career and made a bunch of money and did it. But the way it went, I kind of got to fight in ONE, which is a great experience over there. Got to fight Melvin Manhoff, who was a killer, and beat him, fight for the ONE title, and I always say I'm always like the bridesmaid, so to speak. Fought for 3 world titles, lost every time. But at least I got there.
Yeah, you got there. That's
and
the important part.
the one thing I can always say with pride, and that I never cheated. Like I never did any enhancements. I think my career would have been a lot different had I did, because obviously you can keep that peak. Yeah. My peak was about 2 to 3 years. If I had kept that same level, I think I could have been a world champion. But I always looked at my kids and I always wanted to be like, something morally there. I couldn't cheat otherwise it's different. It's always kind of a weird thing with me. But like now the way the UFC is, I wish I could go back now when it's a fair playing field, because everybody did it. It wasn't who wasn't doing it. And I know firsthand people were doing it, and we go to the big camps and train, and that's the first thing they want to give you, Wow. And I never did. And that's one thing I can say, like, with the most pride, is like, I never cheated. I never have, never will. And at the end of the day, I'm pretty proud of that. I still was at the top, ranked number 7 in the world at some points, and fought for 3 world titles, and ended up finishing my career here in Minnesota on national TV and actually, oddly enough, Dana White was there looking for his fight. And, so it's kind of neat, a good way to end the night. People ask me all the time, well, you think about coming out of retirement. I mean, there's always like that fire. Like I've watched some of these guys, especially now at the UFC where you see all these guys, there's so many fights that the pool at a lower level is watered down. It's not like it was. It's like, well, I know I could beat that guy right now, but I'm not in it just to win a fight. If I was to come out, it'd be, again, my goal would be to be a world champion. And I know the highest level is the best there's ever been. The lowest level, introduction level in the UFC isn't. Like I seriously believe I could go in there and win a fight or two. But once I got to that next level, there's no way. Those champs, those guys that are at that level, even like Tony Martin, who's breaking in the 15, him and I train quite a bit. And as a martial artist as a whole, he's way better than I am. You know, I still got the advantage in the grappling, but as a whole, he's a much better martial artist than me. And he's like top 15. And so in reality, I know I can't compete at that level anymore. So that's what stops me from actually doing it. Cause I mean, we're all fighters until we die. And we think, yeah, there's a fire in there. But I smart enough to realize that I retired for a reason, you know.
That's good. At least you got the brains for that.
Yeah.
So back up a little bit. You mentioned, of course, the weight cut, the 200 down to 170. What are your thoughts on weight cutting? That's always been a controversial topic. You know, the lots of weight in short amount of time. What are your thoughts on that? I think
excessive weight cutting like that, for an example, is ridiculous. But I kind of like Dan Gable's approach on weight cutting. He's like, weight cutting creates discipline. And if you're not watching what you eat and you're not concentrated on your body, I think there's something to it. Now, excessive weight cutting, like cutting 30 pounds in 2.5 weeks is horrendous. It's the stupidest thing a person could do to their body. But I think being disciplined, like if I had 8 weeks, 70 was never easy because you can't eat what you want to eat, but it was feasible. And then I was at a good athletic peak position actually. So I think like weight cutting is good again to create discipline. And Tony said it too, like he cut a lot of weight and he always said, it's the one thing I can control in my weight camp. It's the one thing I can control is what I put into my body. And that's another good point. It's like everything's going 100 miles an hour in your training camps and you're thinking the one thing you can slow down and control is your diet, when you eat, how you eat, and all that stuff. So I think a smart weight cut with time is good. But the problem is, it's like, hey, you got to fight Nakamura. Here's an opportunity.
Right.
You know, and now, I mean, there's actually starting to be money. So I'll use Tony for an example again. You take a fight short notice in Australia, you're going to make $80,000. It's a good matchup. But now you've got to lose 30 pounds to get down to 55.
Right.
You know, it's like, God, I can beat this kid. So now you're weighing everything. It's like, I'm going to get another win. I'm going to put another notch on my belt. I'm going to make 80 grand. That's awesome. But I got to make this freaking weight. So you weigh it out. And in that moment, you're not hungry. You're not dehydrated. You're not starving. You're like, let's do it. And then about the week before the fight, you're thinking, I'm never doing this again. This is the dumbest thing I could ever do. So that is where the weight cuts get tricky, is the short notice fights. If you are disciplined and you have 8 weeks to make your weight, there's no reason not to make your weight. If you have 3 weeks, it gets sketchy. And some people break. And it's hell. So
what do you think of like the ones where like they make weight the night before and then they go out and gorge and they're 20 pounds heavier for their fight the next day?
There again is discipline. You know, I was lucky. I was blessed as I had Luke Popham, who was brown belt, and he was a nutritionist. He owned his own gym. He was perfect fit for my camp because he'd control what I put in my mouth, tell me what I'd eat. If I had my checkpoint on 3 weeks out, I'm 3 weeks out. Luke, I'm 184. Okay, take the apple out of your diet. I like my apples. So take the apple out, my weight would drop, you know, and then he would regulate everything.
Wow.
And so I was blessed on that part. And then I learned a lot in the process too. So I can help the current guys a little bit with their weight. And and again, I wanted to eat cake after I weighed in as well. But Luke was always right there. No, you're not eating cake. You can eat some more chicken. Have some more chicken. You want some pasta? Have some pasta. No white sauce. You can have red sauce. You know, no, keep the dairy out, you know. And every time he was right. Because after the fight, I'd go eat whatever I wanted and I would shit my guts out, so to speak. Excuse my language.
It's okay.
But so like everything he said was right, even though I didn't want to hear, but he was Like I respected him, trusted him. I'm like, fine, you're right. So, but that again is discipline. I mean, it's hard when you've been watching your weight and you ain't been eating anything. And now you make your goal as that weight. It's like, go eat some cake, have some pie, eat some cheeseburgers, whatever it might be. And, so again, that's just discipline. And if you're out to win fights and you're out to be the best in the world, that shouldn't make or break your fight camp.
Yeah.
So again, if you hydrate right and everything, you're not going to balloon up as long as you're drinking the right fluids.
So it's the difference between the guys who take it seriously and the people who are just doing it for the money.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's different. It's all about how you look at yourself as a professional.
Right.
And some people don't consider the diet part of the profession. Some people just think just the gyms. Some people go crazy over nutrition and have to have 100 rest days because my body says I need a rest, but they're not in the gym. So it's such a balancing it out and trying to find the right fit. Right.
So talking about balance, back to when you were fighting. Now, when you were fighting, you were also at the same time, if I remember correctly, you were also promoting and you were also coaching and had your own team. So how did you balance that out, doing all that stuff?
Yeah, it was crazy. A lot of people, like you said, I'm the nicest guy in MMA. Some people said I'm the busiest guy in MMA. But I just always loved being busy. I like using my hands. I like doing stuff, and I kind of embrace the grind and embrace the chaos. And anybody who's been around any of the fights that I promoted, it's freaking chaos.
I remember the one in Brainerd with the outdoor one with the rain. Oh, and he sent like 8 guys to Walmart to get paper towels and mops.
Oh, it was horrible. Well, the story about that one, we had a tent.
It blew off the night before.
And it blew off the night before. We had this huge rainstorm and it saturated the ground. We had 3-foot stakes in the ground holding that monster of a tent. It was 100 by 30 tent.
Like a circus tent, yeah.
Yeah. And it rained and rained and rained and saturated the ground. And then the thing ended up across frickin' town. And then we didn't have time to put it back up again. So we're like, well, let's roll the dice, boys. And obviously we ended up having to take like an hour break. Yep. And everybody headed inside. Then we came back out. Then we're fighting the darkness. And we just, it was chaos. See what I mean?
Yeah.
But we got it. But we got it done. We got it done, and it was good. It was good.
Nice. Let me ask you this: and you're as a parent, you have kids. Now, first of all, do your kids do martial arts?
They have done a little bit, but for the most part, no. They're not. They wrestle. They do some sports. They've wrestled. They've done about every sport known to man. They've done soccer, gymnastics, wrestling, swimming. Football, and they just haven't really found that. My youngest really enjoys football.
Okay.
But the other two really haven't found their niche, and it's a hard spot for me because I think they should be doing sports all the time, whether what that sport might be, whether it's a martial arts or whether it's a whatever competing or something. Because I just think you get that team unity and you find friends within what you're doing, and you typically those people. I have to be careful how I say this. Are not better people, but they're doing something that's not naughty. There.
Right.
I don't know. I have to be careful how I say that, but because not everybody who doesn't do sports are bad kids.
Oh yeah.
But
there's other things they can get involved in.
But there's something that in common with your friends that you can do that's healthy.
Exactly.
Maybe that's a better way to say it.
So let me ask you this then, as a teacher, as a parent, I ask this of all my guests, if someone were to approach you and say, hey, I'm thinking of getting my kids involved in martial arts, what tips would you give them? What to look for in a school, what to look for in an instructor?
Well, obviously when they come to this school, we give everybody a 2-week trial. Because I say this, and you probably know from doing martial arts as well. Mm-hmm. Not every instructor gels with the kid or the parents. Not every school is a good fit. Time schedules sometimes aren't the best. Sometimes people don't know what jiu-jitsu is. They come in and think it's taekwondo. And they're like, so my advice is go to all the schools. They have a free trial. Take advantage of the free trial. See what's the best fit. Make sure the instructor gels with your kids. And then money shouldn't matter at the end of the day, but sometimes it does. So you got to understand the pricing because you don't want to be like, yes, I'm in love with this school, and then not be in your budget.
Right.
So everything matters, but really I think the most important thing is just making sure the kid gels and you're not forcing the kid. The kid wants to be there. You're not like, no, this is what I did. I did karate. I did taekwondo. I did. So I want my kid to do this. I think it's best just to kind of let your kid feel it out, try it out, make sure it's a good fit, and then make that work.
Nice. That's a great answer. So a couple more fun questions just to kind of to wrap it up. First of all, is for all your years in martial arts, is there like a specific philosophy that you've gained from martial arts that you really, holds true to your heart or?
Yeah. Someone told me this once, and I don't know who it was. If it was a Dan Gable quote, a Greg Nelson quote, my grandpa's quote, I don't know whose quote it was, but make excuses to train, not excuses not to train. Nice. So everybody always has an excuse. And someone told me that, and I wish I could remember because I use that quote all the time. I want to put it on my walls in here. But every time I would tell myself, oh, I'm sore, I'm not going to go train, that quote would pop in my head. I'm making excuses not to train, make an excuse to train. Well, I need to go train now because I need to get better. My opponent's training or whatever it might be, that quote. And I tried looking that quote up and I can't find it. But I want to think it was a Dan Gable quote, but I've looked up all Dan Gable's quotes and I haven't been able to find it. So I want to give the right credit to the right person. I just don't know where it came from. So that quote, make excuses to train, not excuses not to train, is like literally I would catch myself all the time. I don't need to run hills today. My legs are tore. I did kettlebells. I did training. But then it's like, oh, you just made an excuse. Get your ass out there. And so I always make excuses to train. Find that excuse why you got to go in, not the excuses why you don't have to go in.
I like that.
So that's kind of my thing.
Nice. And do you have a favorite martial arts book, either that you just like yourself or you've recommended other people?
Not much of a reader, unfortunately. So not especially. I mean, I would love to have a great book that I could say, hey, this one's the best. But no, I'm not much of a reader. So I have to say no.
Oh, that's okay.
Don't got nothing. I don't got nothing.
You're not the first one, so that's okay. That's okay. And final question: is there a favorite martial arts TV show and or movie that you really love? It's like your guilty pleasure, your go-to. If it's on, you got to watch it.
Well, it's kind of cheating, but Vision Quest.
Wrestling, yes.
Was it old 70s?
Early 80s.
Early 80s.
Yeah. Rob Lowe, I think, was in it. Patrick Swayze.
I mean, that's kind of the movie that I go back to. And other than that, I mean, it's Karate Kid, the original Karate Kid, which is just like great, like morals and like how you got to be patient and develop. And sometimes you're developing skills that you don't even know you're developing. You're just going through the training. Like there's a lot into that movie that when I first watch it, it's like, it's a cool movie. People are kicking each other in the head. It's great. But then like, as you grow older and you watch it and you get a little bit more out of the movie than you did it as a kid. So that's actually probably, if you're straight up martial arts, that'd probably be the one.
I always tell people Mr. Miyagi was my first karate instructor.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a great guy. So, well, Brock, I just want to thank you again. Seriously. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time to sit down with us and chat today and getting to know a little more about you. I truly appreciate it. And we'll go ahead and stick a link for your school in the notes for the podcast and talk about it. And if you have any other events coming up, I know right now not much is going on in the world, but I know you still do some promoting when you can and stuff. So
yeah, we're going to try to do some stuff in Brainerd. We got the Takedown Gym we can do promotions whenever we want to, it sounds like up there. So we'll do something there and just do 1 or 2 shows a year and keep the guys busy.
Well, we'll let people know about it. So once again, thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.